My name is Holly Witchey. I've worked in and around museums for about 30 years now. And the remarks I'm going to make today are based on some research I've been thinking about. I can't call it research, it's thoughts I've had as the NMC Scholar in Residence. But before I talk about my idea that matters, and my idea that matters is something I call intergenerosity, you have to understand something. In 1913, a woman named Eleanor Porter wrote a book called Pollyanna. Pollyanna was an annoying little girl who brought joy and gladness to everyone she met. I am not Pollyanna, and you must understand this if anything wonderful is going to come from my idea that matters. Where's the opportunity, and what's intergenerosity? I'd like ask a couple of questions to see if any of you even need intergenerosity in your life. Raise your hand if you're a human being. Thank you. Raise your hand if you work with other human beings. Thank you. Raise your hand if you work in or for an institution or institutions. Raise your hand if you work in or for an institutions where mindsets and generations conflict and conflict. Let's just say conflict. There you go. Raise your hand if collaboration and communication is vital to your life and your work. Well done. Look at that. If you answered yes, or if you raised your hands to any of those suggestions, then I think intergenerosity is something for you. Intergenerosity, how about a definition for it? Intergenerosity is taking an idea into the institution. Intergenerosity is about you making a connection with someone you have conflict with. Intergenerosity is about reaching out to someone who is different, who you disagree with, who comes from a different generation, who lives in a different department, and making a connection and finding out about them. With apologies to John Lovitz and his Harvey Fierstein character, I just want to be valued for what I bring to the table. Is that so wrong? All of us work in institutions, and I work primarily with museums. All of us exist in a world today where there's a bright, young, energetic group of emerging professionals who want to make a difference in the world today. All of us work in institutions where there are senior people who emerging professionals feel are entrenched and are never going to leave. But these are senior people who are there because they feel they still have something to value. And in between those senior professionals and those emerging professionals is a group of middle managers who never made it to the senior positions and who have the emerging professionals pushing up on them and who feel as if they're disenfranchised. Is it any wonder that we have problems in our institutions today? I want to talk a little bit about museums. What do museums value, and specifically what do museums value in the 21st century? In 2010, Nina Simon produced a book called The Participatory Museum, which caused a tsunami of change in museums across North America. Now, the idea behind the Participatory Museum is that we need to respect and engage with our communities and audiences in a different way. This is a great idea. This was not a new idea. Some museums were already doing this, but Nina Simon's book gave a real swift kick in the rear end to museums who were not acknowledging their communities. The issue, though, and if you go and talk to administrators across North America today, they will tell you that they respect and they value inclusivity, the importance of storytelling, and the critical nature of generational learning for their audiences. That's the key, for their audiences. But what about the staff? So I want to talk about what it means to take these same values, inclusivity, the power of storytelling, and intergenerational learning, bringing them into the institution and calling it intergenerosity. So this is my picture for inclusivity. I love this photograph of Larry and Rachel Smith and Jared Bendis because I think it says everything I want to say about what inclusivity means. Inclusivity means that you feel like you are an important part of the group, that you can safely share emotions. Now, I'm not advocating that every workplace needs to look like they're on the edge of hysteria every single moment. But if your workplace is not experiencing these times of joy and these times of trauma together, maybe there's something that can be done. The power of storytelling. Given the three distinguished speakers who spoke before me, can there be any doubt in this room that there is a power in storytelling? For me, storytelling is the ping that we as humans do. The story is the packet that we send to another person, and it's their response to our story, the response to our packet that they send back that tells us we have meaning in our life, that we add value. Storytelling, our stories include an explicit question from us: do I have value to you? I think that's the importance of storytelling, and that's why we need to know what the stories are of the people with whom we work. Now, it's easy to find out the stories of the people we like, isn't it? I could sit and listen to Larry Johnson tell stories forever. Scott Sayre is one of my dearest friends on the planet. I love their stories. Wendy Shapiro, I'm not going to call out everybody I know in the audience, but I love to hear the stories of the people I respect and admire. It's far difficult to sit down and say, I'm going to listen to the story of someone whose opinion I don't respect, or whose opinion I think, or someone who I feel is standing in the way of where my career ought to be, or where I feel my career ought to be. Time out for a story. Sarah's Plaster, a parable. This is my friend Sarah Crisp. She's an artist. She lives in Brighton, England. That's her row house on the right-hand side. Several years ago, Sarah called me and she said, we're having to have plasterers come in to do our ceilings. And she said, it's wonderful here because we found a plasterer that does not use a ladder to do his work. He uses a series of long-handled brushes to make the patterns on the ceiling. And I thought, wow, that's wonderful. I know absolutely nothing about plasterers. I never knew that some of them used ladders. I never knew that some of them used long-handled brushes. Fast forward to Austin, Texas. A week later, I had been invited to an NMC board meeting, and Larry was having one of his usual wonderful cocktail parties, and I was introduced to a wonderful woman, Margot Perez-Green, and she was a board member, and she wandered off, and I was speaking with her husband, and I turned to her husband, and there's a lot of ambient noise, and I said, what do you do? And I heard him say, I'm a plasterer. And I said, that's fascinating. I was just talking to someone about that last week. Do you use a ladder to get closer to your work? And he looked at me and he said, very clearly, I'm a pastor. Oh. Be in the moment. Is what I have to say about that. Listen to the story that people are telling you, not the story that you want to hear, nor the story that you want to respond to as soon as they're finished telling you their story. Okay. Come on. Okay, intergenerational learning. Intergenerational learning is the last of these three parts of the picture. Is there any doubt, does anybody in the audience disagree with the items on the screen that are seen as the benefits of intergenerational learning? But we've discovered this, we know this. Those of us who teach in schools, those of us who teach in higher ed, those of us who teach in museums, we know the power of intergenerational learning. But what are we doing in terms of intergenerational learning within our institutions? Look for a role model if you need one. That's what I'd like to say about this, and I have the perfect role model. If you want to know what positive intergenerational learning looks like, read A Christmas Carol again. My favorite role model for intergenerational learning is Old Fezziwig. And if you remember the story, Charles Dickens, when he meets the ghost of Christmas past, he goes back and sees his school days, and then he goes to his first work environment. And he remembers, this is when the transition starts, he remembers that boss. And I'm sure you can't read it, I'm going to read it anyway. Here's what Old Fezziwig was like. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil, Say that this power lie in words and look, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives us is quite as great as if it costs a fortune. Be Fezziwig, not Scrooge. All right? Intergenerosity in practice. I've been looking around for great examples, and if you have a great example, I would like to hear about it. I'm looking for examples of people who within the workplace are making the effort to step out and say, I'm going to make a difference. As I go through these conferences, I go to content provider conferences, and I go to technology conferences. And time again this week, I've heard people say, oh, when that generation retires, or if only they would let me do, or if only there was some way I could change that person. You know what? You can't change that person, but you can talk to that person, and you don't have to be their best friend. You don't even have to agree with them, and you're not going to try to change their mind. Intergenerosity is not transactional. I repeat, it's not transactional. You don't want something from them. You want to get to know them. So I've got 4 examples of intergenerosity in practice. That man with the cocktail is my husband. My husband, Kurt Witchey, is a seriously good man. This first case of intergenerosity is what I like to call collateral intergenerosity. The motivation for this was he's an MBA from the Weatherhead School at Case Western Reserve University. He was called by the Alumni Association 4 years ago and asked to mentor an incoming MBA student from mainland China. In 4 years, we've had 6 students from mainland China, and the intergenerosity is not the mentoring that my husband does for them. It's the intergenerosity of what these students give back to my husband. Now, I don't know if he would have had a midlife crisis. I don't know if he would have purchased a Porsche or had a young mistress. But what I can say is that 4 years of interested and engaging Chinese MBA students coming to my husband, asking for advice, taking his advice, going out, getting jobs, sharing successes, sharing failures, and coming back and giving him feedback has made a difference in my husband's life at this period when we're in our 50s. Gentleman up on the screen here, and my second example is economically motivated intergenerosity. That's Nick Honeysett. He's the head of operations at the J. Paul Getty Museum. The J. Paul Getty Museum has brown bag lunches. And the brown bag lunches were a chance for Nick and the team to crowdsource the employees to provide training opportunities that would not otherwise have been offered. Nick himself has offered training opportunities in the maturity capability, in resume building, in jobs. There are regular training sessions on iPads, tricks for iPads, iShares, and there are several brown bag lunches that are held about using applications because the staff at the Getty said they'd rather learn how to use institutional applications from someone who's using them in the institution than from a trainer. Anyone on staff can offer a brown bag. All staff is invited. A lot of people use them just to do their presentations for conferences, so they have a run-through before they go off to the conference. I think it's a great idea, and it means the staff gets to know one another better. Tony I met about 4 weeks ago, waiting in line for a train at Union Station in Washington, D.C. to go back to Baltimore for a conference I was at. Tony's a veteran helping veterans. 3 years ago, Tony was homeless. He was on the street in Baltimore, Maryland, when someone from the Maryland Veterans Training and Education Center came, took him off the street, found him housing, and now Tony's giving back. When I met Tony, he'd just come off a 2-day trip to Washington, D.C., where he took veterans from World War II, Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, and Iran on a 2-day trip to Washington, D.C. They went to the House of Representatives, where they were disappointed not to see more representatives. And they went to the memorials where each of the soldiers told stories about their experience. Tony originally just wanted to help veterans, other veterans in his situation, but now he's helping veterans tell stories. Sheboygan County Historical Society, I am running out of time. This is my favorite institution right now. You need to know about the Sheboygan County Historical Society. They have a full and part-time staff of 7 people, 350 volunteers. The prime directive at the Sheboygan County Historical Society is every person who attends a program, every volunteer, if they volunteer once a year or once a month, is a full partner in this institution. If a volunteer comes into a staff member's office, the staff member puts down whatever they're doing and engages the volunteer in a conversation about their life, not what they're offering to the museum, but who they are as an individual. I would like to, Robert Harker, who's the retiring director there, I would like to pack him up and send him to every museum on the planet because he knows what it means to be intergenerous. Mindful intergenerosity, here's your how-to, a short how-to. Intergenerosity means you making a connection with someone, you listening to their story, and you trying to understand what they bring to the table, what they value, and how they feel they're making a part in the organization. 3 more things to remember: a feather, a shoe, and a cup of coffee. I've been taking, with 999,000 people, I've been taking a MOOC with Richard Boyasis from Case Western Reserve on inspiring leadership with emotional intelligence. Leaders suffer from something called stress-related burnout. I think everybody else does too, but leaders, they study leaders in stress-related burnout. And they've discovered that there are 3 emotional strategies for dealing with this. The first one is hope. If you can hope, if you believe that you can make a difference, that will help you. Mindfulness. Before you walk in another person's shoes, you need to know the person who's in your shoes. So know who you are, know why you're connecting with someone, know what you bring to the table, what your anxieties are, and then try to understand their anxieties. And finally, compassion. It takes nothing to pick up a phone and call and say, I'd love to have a cup of coffee with you. There's no agenda. Let's just get together and talk. My promise to you, this will change your life. If you go out in a non-transactional forum and try to make connections with people and listen to their stories, it will change your life. I am an Italian art historian by training. I am incapable of doing a presentation without at least one Renaissance painting. Here's Botticelli's Primavera. I draw your attention to the 3 women who are on the left-hand side of the painting. They are commonly known as the 3 Graces. In fact, they are the 3 Graces, but for someone in the Renaissance, they actually were a visual depiction of an idea that was common. And the idea is a gift given is twice returned. If you reach out and listen to someone's story, good things will come back to you. I promise you that. Intergenerosity, here are your 3 key takeaways for my presentation. Choose to be Fezziwig. You do not need a ladder to do this work. Change the world. Start today. Thank you.